Speaker, I've always approached this on the basis that we should treat everyone with dignity and respect, whatever their different views, and I'll continue to do so.
Starmer confronted. Starmer panics as MP accuses him of maltreating struggling citizens. A storm erupted in the House of Commons this week as a fierce exchange broke out between members of Parliament, culminating in a passionate speech from SNP. Westminster leader Stephen Flynn, who held Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's party responsible for the loss of hundreds of energy jobs in Scotland. Flynn's remarks triggered a heated back and forth, revealing a growing political rift over the future of the UK's energy sector, Scotland's economic stability, and Labour's policy commitments ahead of the general election. Flynn, representing the Scottish constituency of Aberdeen South, did not mince words as he addressed the Speaker. His voice rising with urgency, he slammed both the government and the opposition for what he described as repeated failures to protect jobs and communities. In Scotland's northeast, Flynn began by listing what he claimed were broken promises made by the Prime Minister and his political opponents. "Thank you, Mr. Speaker," Flynn began, standing with a mixture of exasperation and resolve. Prior to the election, the Prime Minister promised that energy bills would come down. They continue to rise. He promised that he would save the refinery at Grangemouth. It shut. And of course, he promised that he would unleash a generation of secure energy jobs in my city of Aberdeen. Then came the bombshell. Well, today, Harbour Energy, the largest independent player in the North Sea, have announced that they are about to shed their workforce by 25%. That's 250 jobs in my constituency gone in the blink of an eye. And do you know who they blame, Mr. Speaker? They blame the policies of the Labour Party. The chamber erupted into murmurs and groans as Flynn continued. So, can I ask the Prime Minister, in fact, can I invite the Prime Minister to come to Aberdeen and explain to my constituents why he is willing to move heaven and earth to save jobs in Scunthorpe while destroying jobs in Scotland? The accusation marked a moment of high drama in the Commons, drawing immediate reactions from benches on all sides. While some MPs nodded in agreement, others appeared visibly irritated, with shouts of nonsense and shameful rhetoric echoing through the chamber. The Prime Minister, clearly prepared for such criticism, responded with a pointed defense of his government's record. Though he did not address the Labour Party's policies directly, he quickly turned his fire on the Scottish National Party and their governance in Holyrood. "Mr. Speaker, nobody wants to see job losses," he began, striking a conciliatory tone before launching into a sharp counterattack. "But I'd remind the right honourable member that before we came into office 10 months ago, the SNP government in Holyrood alongside the Conservative government did absolutely nothing for projects like Granite. Absolutely nothing." The Prime Minister's reference to the Grangemouth refinery, a vital industrial site in Scotland that recently confirmed it would cease oil refining operations, was clearly meant to challenge Flynn's portrayal of an uncaring Westminster. In Grangemouth, he continued, "We have committed £200 million to secure the future for the site, delivered a £100 million deal, and we're helping with the training guarantees that are needed, but the Prime Minister wasn't done." He accused Flynn and the SNP of deflection, of drawing attention to others' failures to mask their own. But just like his First Minister, the honourable gentleman will raise anything to distract from their disastrous record. Almost 1 in 6 people stuck on an NHS waiting list. Standards and violence in Scottish schools. Over £1 billion cut from local government. We gave them the biggest settlement since devolution. They've been in power for nearly 2 decades. They've got absolutely nowhere to hide their appalling record. The combative response reflected a broader strategy of the government to shift the spotlight onto the SNP's domestic governance, especially in the context of recent challenges to the party's leadership and political standing. But Flynn's speech struck a nerve not just for the political drama it generated, but for the deeper questions it raised about the UK's shifting energy policy, the economic fragility of Scotland's North Sea communities, and Labour's positioning as it eyes a potential return to government. The reference to Labour Party policy was no offhand remark. Flynn's remarks seemed to be targeting Labour's evolving stance on energy policy, particularly its pledge to phase out new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea as part of a broader green energy transition, while Labour has maintained that existing licenses would be respected and that its vision is aimed at securing long-term sustainability. Critics have warned that such policies could cause uncertainty in energy hubs like Aberdeen. The city, long known as the oil and gas capital of Europe, is now at the center of a fierce debate about how quickly the UK can or should move away from fossil fuels. Harbour Energy's announcement of a 25% reduction in its workforce has sent shockwaves through the region, with unions and business leaders expressing concern about the speed of transition and the lack of concrete support for affected workers. In a statement issued shortly after the Commons debate, a spokesperson for Harbour Energy said, "While we remain committed to our operations in the North Sea, the evolving regulatory environment and investment climate has forced us to make difficult decisions. We continue to engage with the government and stakeholders to ensure a managed transition, but immediate support is needed. The job cuts come at a precarious time for the Scottish economy, already reeling from inflationary pressures, declining industrial output, and sluggish investment in key sectors. Aberdeen, in particular, is facing a crisis of identity and viability as oil majors downsize or redirect investments. The SNP has for years called for a just transition, a move to renewable energy that protects workers, retrains employees, and sustains communities. Yet critics argue that rhetoric has not translated into effective policy. The Scottish government, led by First Minister John Swinney, has recently committed to a £500 million energy transition fund aimed at reskilling workers and attracting green energy investment. But opponents argue that progress is too slow and lacks coordination with Westminster. Adding to the complexity is the constitutional divide. Energy policy is largely reserved to Westminster, while skills development and economic development sit with Holyrood. The result is a fragmented approach that many believe is ill-suited to the scale of the challenge. Though not directly involved in the exchange in Parliament, Labour responded swiftly to the SNP's accusations. A senior Labour source, speaking off the record, rejected Flynn's assertion. This is political posturing at its worst. Labour has been clear. We will invest £28 billion annually in green jobs and infrastructure. Our plan includes investment in Scotland, in the energy workers of the future. The SNP has failed to create the conditions for innovation and business confidence. Keir Starmer himself has visited Scotland multiple times in recent months, seeking to build bridges with voters and reassure traditional Labour constituencies. But tensions remain, particularly over Labour's perceived ambiguity on oil and gas, which has drawn criticism from both environmentalists and industry leaders. The exchange is likely to resonate in Scotland, where the SNP faces growing pressure from both pro-independence and pro-union voters. Polls suggest a narrowing lead for the party, with Scottish Labour on the rise and seeking to reclaim ground lost over the last decade. For the Conservatives, the Prime Minister's defence of UK-wide investment and critique of SNP mismanagement plays to a familiar theme that Scotland benefits from being part of the Union and suffers under nationalist leadership for Labour. However, the row highlights the tightrope the party must walk, appealing to climate-conscious voters while retaining the support of traditional energy sector communities. Flynn's passionate intervention may boost his party's standing among frustrated constituents in Aberdeen, but it also sharpens the focus on what the SNP itself has delivered. Political analysts have pointed out that while it is easy to blame Westminster for energy job losses, the SNP has had ample time and resources to chart a sustainable path forward, and hasn't done so convincingly. As Parliament erupts over job losses and energy policy, the political temperature in the UK rises. The coming months will see more such confrontations, especially as the general election looms and parties attempt to distinguish themselves on economic and climate issues. Stephen Flynn's fiery address may have been aimed at Keir Starmer's Labour Party, but its implications ripple across the entire political spectrum. At stake are not just 250 jobs in Aberdeen, but the future of the UK's energy transition, the economic security of thousands, and the credibility of every major party's plan for a greener, fairer Britain. The furious exchange in Parliament may seem like just another episode of political theatre, but beneath the shouting lies a crucial question about Britain's energy future and the politics shaping it. With Harbour Energy's announcement still reverberating through the northeast of Scotland, analysts, business leaders, and citizens are asking, how did we get here and what comes next? The UK's North Sea oil and gas industry has long been a pillar of both economic prosperity and political power. In Aberdeen, jobs, investment, and infrastructure have relied on the fossil fuel industry for more than 5 decades. But with climate change climbing the political agenda, the country faces pressure to shift. And for cities like Aberdeen, Grangemouth, and beyond, the stakes couldn't be higher. Stephen Flynn's fiery intervention may fade from the headlines in days or weeks, but the problems he raised are long-term. The loss of 250 jobs in his constituency is a painful reminder that policy has consequences and that the rush to a greener economy must not come at the cost of those who built the old one. Flynn's speech continued to resonate beyond Westminster as political commentators and industry figures weighed in. His confrontation, though directed at the Prime Minister, had a deeper undercurrent targeting a Labour Party that is increasingly seen as caught between its traditional working-class support and its modern, climate-conscious voter base. The backlash was swift. In Scotland, where the energy sector has long been central to the local economy, workers and union representatives echoed Flynn's concerns. Many workers in Aberdeen expressed a growing sense of abandonment. For decades, they had powered the country, helped fuel its economy, and now, as the political winds shifted, many felt they were being discarded in the name of climate goals that still lacked a clear roadmap for replacement livelihoods. Former offshore engineer Graham McPherson, now unemployed for over 6 months, said that he felt like a political pawn. They say it's about green jobs in the future. But my job was in the present. It paid the bills. It put food on the table. If they want to transition, that's fine. But what are we transitioning to? Where's the support? In Edinburgh, business leaders met behind closed doors to assess the broader economic impact of Harbour Energy's decision. Investment analysts warned that confidence in the North Sea was eroding, not because of an intrinsic lack of opportunity, but due to uncertainty, political, regulatory, and financial. The UK's energy policy, many said, had become a battleground rather than a blueprint. The Scottish government, meanwhile, issued a statement defending its record. It cited existing efforts to retrain workers and its just transition plans as proof that it was not abandoning the Northeast, but opposition. MSPs quickly countered that the response had been reactive and underfunded. They argued that the region had needed serious structural investment years ago, not after headlines had already turned grim. As the debate raged on, the fallout extended to local councils, where budgets for employment, training, infrastructure, and innovation hubs remained stretched thin. In Aberdeen, City officials called for an emergency task force to address the crisis. Some proposed new incentives for green tech companies to establish operations in the city. Others called for an acceleration of carbon capture and storage projects. But even among optimists, the message was clear. Time was running out. Westminster remained divided. On the Conservative side, MPs pointed to Labour's green agenda as a threat to national energy security. They argued that North Sea production remained critical during the transition period and that Labour's stance would push investors away, increase reliance on imports, and jeopardize tens of thousands of jobs. Labour, attempting to steer a middle course, reiterated that its policies were being misrepresented. Party spokespeople insisted that existing licenses would be honored and that no workers would be left behind. But the specifics of Labour's alternative employment plan, how many jobs, where, and when, remained vague. Environmental campaigners were also weighing in, defending Labour's stance, but demanding faster, more transparent actions to support displaced workers. Green groups praised the ambition to phase out oil and gas, arguing that nonetheless, the broader discomfort remained. For many MPs, and indeed for members of the public observing from outside, the issue wasn't just about missed statements or delayed updates. It was about principle. It was about whether elected officials were being systematically deprived of their role as the first recipients and primary reviewers of government policy, the matter of the immigration white paper loomed large. The Prime Minister's speech, which reportedly drew comparisons to Powell's language in both tone and framing, had struck a particularly raw nerve. By delivering that speech outside Parliament, the government not only breached the code, but arguably used a historic platform to signal controversial policy directions without immediate parliamentary challenge. MPs were handed physical copies of the white paper that morning, but many felt this was more of a procedural gesture than a meaningful act of consultation. Several argued that the complexity of the document and its political sensitivity required more than just a few hours of review before debate. One MP described it as a 100-page bombshell dropped with no warning, adding that the time for meaningful scrutiny had been deliberately constrained. There were also whispers among the parliamentary press gallery that the speech's contents had been coordinated with sympathetic media outlets in advance, ensuring that newspaper headlines were shaped before parliamentary responses could dilute or challenge the framing. If true, this practice would reflect a growing preference for media-first governance, which, while effective in controlling narrative, fundamentally undermines the principles of democratic deliberation. Within this context, the MP's demand for consequences became all the more urgent. If we do not act now, they warned, we risk not just damage to the ministerial code, but to the very credibility of this institution. The speech concluded with a pointed challenge to the leader of the House, not merely to acknowledge the problem, but to state publicly what steps would be taken to ensure that such breaches would no longer occur, and what consequences would follow when they did. The leader's response was measured but non-committal. She reiterated her commitment to keeping Parliament informed, promised to review procedures, and emphasized the government's intention to uphold its responsibilities. Yet, no concrete disciplinary measures were proposed. No specific inquiries or reforms were announced. For some, this reinforced the fear that the code, once seen as the ethical spine of ministerial behavior, had now become optional. In the days following the debate, public and political pressure began to build. Civil society groups, constitutional experts, and political commentators joined the chorus, calling for the establishment of a formal ministerial code enforcement office, an independent body with the power to investigate and recommend sanctions for breaches. Others argued that Parliament itself should reclaim this responsibility, perhaps through a cross-party committee tasked with immediate reviews of procedural violations, Some MPs went further, demanding that the Prime Minister appear before the